Well, let me tell you about this absolutely wild ride that my significant other and I have been on. Our beautiful bundle of joy, also known as our baby, graced our lives with their presence just 9 short weeks ago. Now here's where things get a little bit crazy. My partner, being 11 whole years older than me, has a mother who is quite literally desperate for a grandchild. And trust me, she doesn't hold back when it comes to voicing her desires. Picture this, constant comments about how everyone else's children are having babies and how we're both getting old. Oh, and let's not forget her ever so blunt statement of, "I'll be too old to enjoy my grandchildren." Now let's be clear, these not so subtle jabs are directed towards my partner, but somehow I always find myself caught in the crossfire. Now I pride myself on being understanding and patient, but when I was 39 weeks pregnant, yes, 39 weeks, she made a comment to my partner saying, "If you think I'm doing 100% of being the grandparent and her parents do nothing, you are sadly mistaken." Can you believe that? For context, my in-laws live a mere 20 seconds down the street and have keys to our place. And not only that, but they have the habit of popping in whenever they please, which honestly wasn't a problem until now. Oh, and let's not forget that they're retired while my parents still live an hour away and hold full-time jobs. And yet, despite all of this, my partner and I never once asked for them to prepare for or care for our baby. We've always believed that it's not their responsibility and we want them to truly enjoy spoiling their grandchild, not treating it as a chore. But then, those words from my mother-in-law, let's just say, it didn't sit well with me. Why, you ask? Well, let me share a few reasons. First, my mom was constantly coming over and staying the night to help me prepare for the baby. And secondly, it simply wasn't in our plans to have our parents as full-time carers for our child. See, we want them to enjoy their time with the baby, not be burdened by it. So since the arrival of our precious one, my partner and I have had to set up some boundaries. To be honest, we knew it would be necessary with how we predicted my mother-in-law's behavior, and boy, were we right. It all came to a head a mere 3 weeks postpartum when I was home alone with the baby, trying to nurse and rest, when suddenly, the door opens. Naturally, my new mommy instincts kicked in, and I quickly sat up, while still recovering from my stitches, mind you, to find my mother-in-law standing in front of me. Apparently, she wanted to see the baby and thought nothing of just walking in without so much as a heads up. I tried dropping some hints to get her to leave, but she just didn't seem to catch on or chose to ignore them. And then, it happened. She actually followed me to change the baby's diaper and stood far too close, just watching while I did so. I couldn't take it any longer and made a face that clearly showed my frustration. Finally, she seemed to get the hint and left. And after that little incident, my partner had a much-needed conversation with her, explaining the need for boundaries. You see, the issue is that my mother-in-law has never truly had boundaries set by her own child, and unfortunately I have a sneaking suspicion that she views me as the bad wife, who won't allow her unlimited access to her grandchild. Every time she comes over, which is a solid 2 to 3 times per week, she can't resist telling the baby, yes, telling them, about how she can't wait to hold them and never let go. What even is that? My own mother, on the other hand, behaves completely differently. She's respectful, offers to hold the baby if I need some help, but never insists on it. And let's not forget the strange comments from my father-in-law. It was right after I finished nursing and handed the baby over to my partner when he started getting fussy. My partner was going to give them back, but my father-in-law actually blocked him and said, "Sorry, but you can't have them now." I mean, seriously? Is it just my mom instincts on high alert, or do these comments honestly sound strange and uncalled for? I can't help but feel like my hormones and protective mama bear side are to blame, but my goodness, these little digs from my in-laws are really starting to get under my skin. Now, before you write me off as just an ungrateful and unfair daughter-in-law, hear me out. Don't get me wrong, my mother-in-law does bring us food sometimes, and let me tell you, she does make a mean casserole, but it's like we're supposed to just accept all of her, even the parts that make us uncomfortable. Is it really too much to ask for a little bit of respect and understanding? Apparently so. And let's not forget when we mentioned enrolling our child in daycare, my mother-in-law immediately suggested that we enroll them in a daycare closer to her. We politely declined because we have a preference for a different one. And then she has the nerve to say that I never let her help me. But let's be real. Her help is simply coming over uninvited and making awkward comments while staring at the baby. I apologize for venting, but these things have been weighing heavily on my mind. Luckily, I have an amazing support system in my village, aka my parents, siblings, and friends who also have babies. So, while these digs may seem like nothing to some, for me, they're starting to add up. Oh, the joys of motherhood. What do you think? Am I being petty, or are my feelings justified?
About a year ago, my wife decided to save a cat, and let me tell you, this feline is the most infuriatingly annoying creature on earth. He demands attention around the clock and insists on being involved in everything we do. Since his arrival, I haven't had a single night of uninterrupted sleep. His midnight serenades are endless. We've spent thousands on vets and behavior experts trying to decode his antics. Turns out, he's an orange cat, apparently notorious for their mischievousness. He's healthy, pampered beyond belief, and yet I'm at my breaking point. This demanding furball insists on wet food all day long and will yowl through the night until someone gives in to his culinary demands. If he's not howling, he's busy clawing at walls or doors while giving me that soul-piercing stare. Honestly, managing 14-hour workdays as a single dad with a colicky newborn was easier than enduring this cat's torture techniques. I want him gone. My wife understands how challenging he is but fears no one else would adopt him. She doesn't want him ending up on some euthanasia list. Frankly, I'm past caring. I told her she could either bunk with him in the garage at night or we find him another home because I'm done suffering due to this hefty orange bundle's insatiable hunger. My wife is understandably upset. We took on this responsibility together and should continue seeking solutions as a team. She shouldn't have to handle it alone just because she's worried about his future elsewhere. But I am exhausted beyond words. My kids think I'm heartless, but aren't exactly lining up to help with Mr. Orange Menace either, so their opinions aren't swaying me much right now. In fact, my son suggested sharing our predicament here for some feedback, and honestly, I'm open to any judgments or advice you've got. Am I overreacting, or are my wife and that furry little ginger devil in cahoots to drive me insane? Please let me know in the comments.
The unexpected family drama when love meets baggage. Hey there, drama lovers and relationship rubberneckers. Grab your popcorn and settle in because boy, do I have a story for you today. Picture this. You're dating a guy with a tragic past and bratty daughters. I mean, we're talking cold shoulders colder than a penguin's butt. And now they want to be besties? Hold my drink, folks. We're diving headfirst into a family drama so juicy, it'll make your favorite soap opera look like a kindergarten playground dispute. First things first, let me introduce myself. I'm your friendly neighborhood bartender with a twist. And I'm not talking about the kind that goes in your martini. I'm the gal who went from mixing drinks to mixing it up with a ready-made family. Talk about a career change, am I right? So, what's on the menu today? We're serving up a piping hot plate of am I wrong for not being friendly with my boyfriend's daughters now that they've warmed up to me? Spoiler alert, it's complicated, and it involves a beach house. Because nothing says family bonding like sand in your shorts and resentment in your heart. Let's meet our players, shall we? We've got me, your humble narrator, a 42-year-old bartender with a trust fund. Think Made in Manhattan meets Cocktail, but with more family drama and less Tom Cruise. Tim, my 59-year-old boyfriend, a banker who's more broke than a piggy bank in a bull shop. He's a widower with a heart of gold and a credit score of, well, let's not go there. The daughters, Tim's pride and joy and my personal frost queens, they live 6 hours away, which honestly isn't far enough sometimes. Now I know what you're thinking, but wait, mysterious bartender lady, what does this have to do with a beach house? Oh, honey, buckle up because we're about to take a wild ride from Christmas cold shoulders to summertime shenanigans faster than you can say family therapy. So let's dive a little deeper into this motley crew, shall we? There's Tim, my silver fox with a heart of gold and a wallet full of cobwebs. Poor guy's been through the ringer. His late wife battled cancer not once, not twice, but 3 times. It's like the universe looked at Tim and said, "You look like you could use some extra hardship, my dude." And me? Well, I'm the bartender with a secret weapon. A trust fund that would make Paris Hilton raise an eyebrow. But don't let that fool you. I work hard for my money, honey. There's an art to mixing the perfect Manhattan while dodging drunken pickup lines. Then we have Tim's daughters. Picture the Mean Girls, but instead of Regina George, we have 2 grown women who apparently missed the memo that high school ended decades ago. Now, let me paint you a picture of our Christmas adventures. Imagine, if you will, a Hallmark movie gone horribly wrong. There we were, Tim and I, driving 6 hours to spread some holiday cheer. But instead of warm hugs and cozy fires, we got the kind of cold reception that would make the North Pole seem tropical. Year 1, I thought, okay, they're grieving. I get it. I'll be the bigger person. The girls ignored me harder than I ignore my ex's texts. They dragged Tim away faster than a toddler with a new toy. And their husbands? Let's just say if avoiding eye contact was an Olympic sport, they'd be gold medalists. Tim, bless his heart, tried to play peacemaker. He scolded the girls. They apologized. To him, not me, because apparently I'm chopped liver, and blamed it all on the pain of seeing their dad with someone new. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste pennies. Year 2 rolls around and I'm thinking, new year, new attitude, right? Wrong. It was like Groundhog Day, but instead of Bill Murray learning life lessons, I was learning how many ways a person can be snubbed in a 24-hour period. Now, here's where things get interesting. This year I put my foot down. I told Tim, honey, go see your girls. I'll stay here and deck the halls with boughs of peace and quiet. But because I'm not completely heartless and because my brother owns a dealership, I leased Tim a fancy ride. You know, so he could visit more often without his back screaming bloody murder. Tim calls the girls, excited as a puppy with a new bone. But instead of "thanks, Dad," we get, "How dare you spend Mom's money on some bimbo bartender?" Cue the family drama explosion. Suddenly, it's like we're on an episode of Dr. Phil meets the Jerry Springer Show. The truth comes out faster than tequila shots on ladies' night. Turns out the girls had no clue about the 6 maxed-out credit cards, the second mortgage that had the house underwater faster than the Titanic, the looming threat of foreclosure and bankruptcy. They thought there was a life insurance policy waiting in the wings like a fairy godmother. Surprise, girls! The only fairy tale here is the one you've been telling yourselves. So now, faster than you can say gold digger, I've gone from home-wrecking bimbo to potential meal ticket. Suddenly, the girls want my number. They're sorry I felt lonely at Christmas. And the kicker? They want to come visit next summer. How convenient that I happen to live near a beach, right? I can see it now. Sorry we treated you like garbage for 2 years. Can we use your beach house as a personal resort? To forgive or not to forgive, that is the question. Now, Tim thinks I should extend an olive branch. Or in this case, a beach towel. He says I'm being unforgiving. I say I'm being realistic, with a side of self-respect. I've told Tim, no way am I giving out my number. I'll be polite if they visit, but we're not braiding each other's hair and sharing secrets anytime soon. I don't need frenemies. I've got plenty of those at work, thank you very much. So let's break this down, shall we? We've got 2 years of Arctic-level cold shoulders, a financial revelation that would make Oprah gasp, and a sudden change of heart that's more suspicious than gas station. Sushi. But here's my dilemma, folks. Do I take the high road and forgive? Or do I stand my ground and keep my beach house sand blissfully daughter-free? On one hand, holding grudges is bad for your complexion. On the other hand, so is stress. And something tells me having these girls around would be more stressful than working a biker bar on nickel beer night. Now it's your turn to play Judge Judy. What would you do in my designer flip-flops? Are you team forgive and forget, or team thanks but no thanks? Drop your verdict in the comments below. Bonus points for creative solutions. Wrong answers only. If you enjoyed this wild ride through the land of family drama, hit that subscribe button faster than Tim's daughters changed their tune. Trust me, with my luck, there's plenty more where this came from. And speaking of more drama, tune in next week when we tackle the age-old question. Is it okay to accidentally spill red wine on your mother-in-law's white carpet if she criticizes your cooking one more time? It's gonna be a doozy. Just kidding. But remember, folks, family drama. Can't live with them. Can't serve them the wrong drink order without getting fired. Until next time, keep your drinks cold and your family feuds entertaining.
Well, folks, buckle up and grab your popcorn, because boy, do I have a story for you. Ever wondered what happens when your life turns into a soap opera, but instead of dramatic music, you get a laugh track? Welcome to my world. I'm about to take you on a wild ride through the treacherous waters of family drama, sprinkled with a healthy dose of humor and a dash of karmic justice. Trust me, by the end of this tale, you'll either be laughing, crying, or calling your therapist. Maybe all three. Hi there. I'm Jim, your friendly neighborhood divorced dad and unwitting star of this tragicomedy. Once upon a time, I was living the American dream. Wife, kid, white picket fence, the whole shebang. Little did I know that life was about to serve me a curveball that would make even the most dramatic telenovela writers blush. Picture this. It's a beautiful day in suburbia. The birds are chirping, the lawnmowers are humming, and my wife of 15 years decides she's traded in her mom jeans for a sugar daddy. But wait, it gets better. My darling daughter, the apple of my eye, decides to tag along for the ride. Talk about a plot twist, right? Now, I know what you're thinking. Jim, my man, this sounds more like a tragedy than a comedy. And you'd be right, if it weren't for the absolutely ridiculous turns this story takes. Trust me, we're about to hit more loops than a roller coaster at Six Flags. Stick around, folks, because we're diving deep into the belly of the beast. We've got affairs, betrayals, prodigal returns, and even a sprinkle of sweet, sweet karma. By the end of this video, you'll have laughed, you'll have cried, and you'll probably be thanking your lucky stars that your family is only moderately dysfunctional. So there I was, thinking life was pretty good. Sure, the minivan needed an oil change, and maybe I'd put on a few dad bod pounds, but hey, that's life, right? Wrong. Turns out, my dear wife Sarah had other plans. One day, she comes home with stars in her eyes and a spring in her step that I haven't seen since our honeymoon. Jim, she says, I've met someone. Now, being the naive fool I was, I thought she meant a new friend. Maybe someone from her book club or yoga class. But no, ladies and gentlemen, she meant she'd met her soulmate. And by soulmate, I mean a guy named Gerald who was pushing 60 but had a wallet fatter than Santa's belly on Christmas Eve. Now, my daughter Laura, sweet, adorable, 12-year-old Laura, she wasn't having any of it. At first. You see, Laura and I were thick as thieves. We're talking matching t-shirts at Disneyland Close. So when Mommy Dearest announced she was trading in our cozy life for a mansion and a sugar daddy, Laura threw the mother of all tantrums. But here's where it gets interesting, folks. One day, Gerald swoops in with his shiny Porsche and takes Laura out for some quality time. My baby girl left the house in her usual ponytail and sneakers. She came back 5 hours later with a $100 haircut, designer jeans, and an attitude that would make Regina George look like a saint. Just like that, faster than you can say gold digger in training, my little girl was Team Gerald. Fast forward a few years, and life's looking pretty sweet for the happy new family. Sarah's got more diamonds than a geological survey, Lara's closet looks like a Gucci showroom, and Gerald, well, Gerald's just happy he's not eating dinner alone anymore. But you know what they say about all that glitters, right? Turns out, the sweet life isn't all it's cracked up to be. Sarah starts feeling like a trophy wife, shocker. Lara's going through designer handbags faster than I go through dad jokes, and Gerald, let's just say his midlife crisis, is having a midlife crisis. Now, brace yourselves for the plot twist of the century. It's been 10 years since The Great Escape, and guess who shows up on my doorstep? That's right, Laura, now a statuesque 22-year-old, clutching a Louis Vuitton suitcase and sporting a pout that could sink 1,000 ships. Turns out, Sugar Daddy wasn't so sweet after all. Once the novelty of playing happy families wore off, Gerald kicked them both to the curb faster than you can say prenup. And poor Sarah, well, she'd shuffled off this mortal coil, leaving Laura with no one to turn to but dear old dad. There she was, looking all forlorn and teary-eyed, probably expecting me to welcome her with open arms. But let me tell you, folks, a decade of child support payments and lonely Christmases can do funny things to a man's heart. Now, I'm not saying I'm a vengeful man, but let's just say my blood pressure didn't exactly plummet when I saw Laura standing there, looking like a lost puppy in Prada. But hey, a dad's gotta do what a dad's gotta do, right? So I let her in. And boy, oh boy, did the fun begin. Turns out, my little princess wasn't exactly equipped for life in the real world. She expected gourmet meals when all I could offer was microwave dinners. She turned her nose up at my trusty old Subaru, probably missing Gerald's fleet of luxury cars. But here's the kicker, folks. Remember that karma I mentioned? Well, it came knocking in the form of my new girlfriend, Linda, and her kids. Picture this. Laura, used to being the center of attention, suddenly having to share her dear old dad with a ready-made family. The look on her face was priceless, like she'd just bitten into a lemon wrapped in $1,000 bill. So there you have it, folks. The saga of a dad, a daughter, and a detour through the land of luxury. It's been a wild ride, hasn't it? From heartbreak to hilarity, from betrayal to begrudging reconciliation. Now, I know what you're thinking. Jim, my man, what's the moral of this story? Well, let me tell you, life's too short to hold grudges, but it's just long enough to enjoy a little karmic justice. Love your kids, but don't let them walk all over you. And remember, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy a whole lot of trouble. But hey, enough about me. I bet some of you out there have some wild family stories of your own. Maybe your uncle ran off with the circus, or your grandma turned out to be a secret spy. Whatever it is, I want to hear it. Drop those stories in the comments below. Let's turn this comment section into the world's craziest family reunion. And hey, if you enjoyed this little roller coaster ride through my family album, why not stick around for more? Hit that subscribe button faster than my ex-wife hit the jackpot. Trust me, my life's an endless source of material. Who knows what'll happen next? Maybe Laura will discover her long-lost twin, or Gerald will show up asking to be my roommate. In this family, anything's possible. Until next time, folks, keep laughing, keep loving, and maybe keep your wallet under lock and key. This is Jim, signing off.
The sweet smell of Baccarat Rouge wafted through the air as I spritzed myself with the extravagant perfume. It was a gift from my aunt, and I felt a surge of pride as I admired my ever-growing collection of over 400 bottles. Each bottle held a memory, a story, and a scent that transported me to a different time and place. My passion for perfume began years ago, fueled by my first job at a burrito joint. Every penny I earned went into purchasing fragrances, and I loved sharing them with others. I decanted samples, let friends try new scents, and even gifted bottles as tokens of appreciation. But my generosity had its limits. Recently, I discovered that my 17-year-old niece, under the cover of walking my dog, had been pilfering from my precious collection. She decanted my perfumes, sold the samples to her friends, and pocketed the cash. Fury coursed through me as I tallied the cost of her pilferage. Thankfully, she mostly stole the TikTok-famous perfumes like Bianco Latte and Escapade Gourmand, but she also snatched an entire 2.5-ounce bottle of Baccarat Rouge worth over $3, along with full bottles of designer perfumes like Marc Jacobs Daisy, Burberry Her Elixir, and Flower Bomb. My anger wasn't just about the stolen perfumes, it was about the betrayal. I had trusted her, welcomed her into my home, and she had repaid my kindness with deception. I printed out a list of the missing perfumes and their estimated value, handed it to my sister, and demanded full reimbursement. She was furious, defending her daughter, claiming she was just a kid, and kids make mistakes. Yes, I retorted, kids make mistakes, and this is a valuable lesson for her to learn. My sister argued that the money my niece had earned was meant for her first car. I remained unmoved. She was lucky I wasn't pressing charges or taking her to small claims court, but now doubt gnawed at me. Was I being too harsh? Am I overreacting for not being more understanding of my niece's youthful indiscretion? I know I have a large collection, and perhaps I could have been more vigilant. However, her actions were still a betrayal of my trust. She not only stole from me, but also engaged in deceitful behavior, selling the perfumes without my knowledge or consent. I believe in holding people accountable for their actions, regardless of age. My niece needs to understand the consequences of her choices and learn to take responsibility for her mistakes. While I understand my sister's concern about her daughter's car fund, I believe that learning a valuable lesson is far more important than material possessions. So, is it my fault? Ultimately, that's for you to decide. But I stand by my decision to hold my niece accountable for her actions. This experience has been a difficult one, but it has also taught me a valuable lesson. I will continue to share my love of perfume with others, but I will also be more cautious about who I trust with my precious collection.
My younger brother, David, has caused me nothing but strife from the moment he was born. To say that he has made my life a living hell would be an understatement. And now, as if his constant taunting and bullying weren't enough, he's gone and gotten my wife pregnant. And who does he turn to for help after our parents disowned him? Me, the older brother he's always resented. The same one who they left their $2 million inheritance to. The irony of it all. But let me give you some background on our relationship. David and I were always like oil and water. He was the golden child in our mother's eyes, always being favored and doted on. She cooked his meals, did his laundry, and even asked me to help him with his school work. Why? Simply because we were family. It didn't matter that I never received the same treatment or consideration. I accepted it, as I was a fiercely independent child. Perhaps it was partly my fault for always meeting his needs without expecting anything in return. David had no reason to be jealous or envious, yet it seemed like he harbored a deep-seated resentment towards me. To give you an idea of the kind of person I am, I have always been straightforward and honest, never one to sugarcoat things. I believe my mother may have developed a negative perception of me because of my straightforwardness. This favoritism of David over me caused a rift between us. He was the family's darling, while I played second fiddle. I didn't mind, though, as we were growing up. It wasn't until later on that things began to deteriorate. Problems started when David started to tease and mock me for being different from him. Growing up, I was a quiet and introverted kid who enjoyed studying and keeping to myself. He, on the other hand, was loud and rough, just like our dad. While I tended to be straightforward and honest, he had a way of twisting things and making others believe his version of events. My mother's blind favoritism towards David only added fuel to his fire. She would always laugh it off when I complained about his taunts and bullying, stating that it wasn't a big deal. But David's antics escalated over the years. He no longer limited his teasing to verbal insults. He started to do more malicious things that could have caused physical harm. He would even invade my privacy, going as far as reading my diary and then tattling on me to my mother. When I confronted him about it, he would get away with an innocent shrug and a smirk. It was downright infuriating. One time, during a particularly heated argument, he even went as far as to tell me to kill myself. I could easily brush off most insults from him, but that one stung, especially since I was struggling with my mental health at the time. It was devastating to hear my own brother, someone who was supposed to support and protect me, utter those words. But the worst part was that my own parents didn't seem to care. My mother even took his side, scolding me and claiming that it was my fault for irritating him. As if that wasn't enough, David continued to bully and belittle me in school, even going as far as to side with the bullies who were tormenting me. Instead of standing up for his own brother, he joined in on the name-calling, encouraging them to physically harm me. I was on my own, with no support from my family. But things finally came to a head when David attempted to set my hair on fire during a high school party. It was a shocking and horrifying incident, and I couldn't believe my own flesh and blood would stoop that low. My mother, unbelievably, defended him, stating that he was only playing. Seriously, who behaves like that? Thankfully, my dad stepped in and finally put his foot down. He saw the severity of the situation and even threatened to call the police on David. This was a turning point for my brother, as he had never faced any consequences for his actions before. He was genuinely stunned when my dad made it clear that enough was enough, and that David needed to start respecting his older brother. Later that evening, my father came into my room to talk. This was a shock to me, as I never expected his support. He always told David how similar they were, which was true. But Dad admitted that he had waited for years, hoping that David would mature. However, he was slowly realizing that my brother was becoming a big bully. Hearing this from my father was incredibly validating, and I almost broke down in tears. I confessed everything that David had done to me over the years, and even mentioned the bullying at school. My dad was shocked at how much I had endured and immediately took action. The next day, he spoke to the principal and made sure that the bullies were warned about severe consequences if they continued. But my dad didn't stop there. He wanted me to feel empowered, so he made the bold decision to enroll me in MMA at a local gym. He told me that I needed to man up and stand up to the bullies in my life. While it may have seemed laughable for a nerdy kid like me to learn how to fight, I was determined. I managed my time well, balancing my studies and daily workouts. Those MMA classes changed my life for the better. However, as expected, David's behavior didn't stop there. He continued to be angry and short-tempered, becoming worse with age. He started to distance himself from me, realizing that he could no longer physically harm me. So he resorted to verbal insults whenever our parents weren't around. It became unbearable, and I longed to move out and get away from him. Multiple times, I asked my mother to mediate a sit-down conversation for us to resolve our issues, but she always refused, saying that she didn't want to get involved. I couldn't understand why David treated me with such animosity. Was it just puberty, or did he genuinely hate me? As much as it pained me, I couldn't help but wonder. But one thing was certain, dealing with his constant insults and bullying was no longer something I could tolerate. I longed to have a healthy relationship with my brother, but it seemed like an impossible feat. I was at my wit's end. While my brother and I may have shared some childhood memories, the bond we have now is almost non-existent. Thanks to my dad's intervention, at least he seems to have finally understood that he can no longer bully me. But deep down, I still long for a relationship with him, even though I know it may never happen. As for now, I continue to work on myself, both mentally and physically, and try to create a better future for myself. So I finally skedaddled to my dream university, scholarship in hand and metaphorical tail between my legs. My dad threw a rager of a party in my honor, and even Mom seemed to crack a proud smile. David, however, remained as aloof as a sphinx, barely acknowledging my academic triumph. Leaving for uni was a bittersweet symphony. Excitement for the future danced a jig with relief at escaping the toxic miasma that was my childhood home. The first few months were a liberating aria, a chorus of newfound friends, engaging classes, and the construction of a life far removed from the oppressive atmosphere of my youth. The constant fear of David's verbal grenades lifted, replaced by a newfound peace that resonated like a soothing cello. During my sophomore year, fate intervened at a frat party, introducing me to Karen, my future wife. We clicked like two puzzle pieces, instantly forming a connection that felt as inevitable as gravity. However, coming from a religious background, the prospect of out-of-wedlock offspring was frowned upon. So when we discovered the pitter-patter of tiny feet during our final year, we did the honorable thing and tied the knot. Our wedding was at a fair, brimming with joy and the blessings of our parents. At that moment, I believed Karen was my soulmate, the one woman I'd share my life's journey with, a veritable monogamous melody. Despite siren songs from other women, I remained steadfast, content in the harmony of our marriage. Karen was the girl of my dreams, and I never wanted to sully the purity of our union. But fate, it seems, is a fickle maestro, prone to discordant interludes. Two incidents of infidelity shattered the symphony of our marriage, each a jarring dissonance. The first, an intermittent affair with her married co-worker, stretched over several years, a discordant counterpoint to our melody. The second, a brief fling with an ex during a visit to her family, felt like a jarring sforzando. Some might call me naive, and looking back, I can't entirely disagree. Each time we separated, I chose forgiveness, the oboe of reconciliation attempting to bridge the chasm. I didn't want our child to grow up in a broken home, believing we could overcome these obstacles. The affair with the co-worker I attributed to youthful indiscretion, a poorly judged passage in the score. For a while, things seemed to improve, even though a subtle dissonance lingered. I tried to silence the inner critic, knowing that true forgiveness required a genuine effort to start afresh. For years passed since her second betrayal, and I felt confident in my decision, the melody of trust slowly rebuilding. Karen seemed genuinely remorseful, and we were sketching out the future of our family, a harmonious portrait of domestic bliss. Then, 3 months ago, my world imploded in a cacophony of betrayal. Karen confessed to a long-term affair, dropping the bombshell that our son might not even be mine. The shock hit me like a timpani roll, a visceral mix of disbelief and anger. My mind struggled to grasp the magnitude of her confession. After days of grappling with the dissonance, I demanded the truth, the clarion call of my wounded pride. Karen's response was a frigid aria, devoid of empathy or remorse. Her vague justifications left me with more questions than answers. The scene was surreal, a jarring dissonance to the life I thought I knew. I pressed Karen the urgent, pizzicato of my inquiries demanding answers. I needed to know the father of the child I'd raised as my own. Finally, the truth emerged, a discordant revelation. It was David. My eyes bulged like a caricature, disbelief ringing in my ears. Karen explained that they'd become friends after I introduced her to the family. She'd stayed at our house from Thanksgiving to New Year's. David, usually as warm as a Siberian winter, had been surprisingly cordial towards her, which I naively attributed to his desire to make her feel welcome. Karen, eager for acceptance, spent as much time as possible with Mom, inevitably learning about the rift between David and me. She questioned me, and I poured out my heart, lamenting the irreparable damage to our relationship. Karen, the manipulative maestro, saw an opportunity. She started including David in our outings, hoping to forge a bond between us, all the while subtly pushing them closer together. Movie nights became a duet for David and Karen, their choices dictated by his tastes. I noticed them hanging out and playing video games, but dismissed it as harmless interaction. Little did I know, it was a prelude to the crescendo of their betrayal. Karen admitted that one day David, fresh from a breakup, opened up to her, seeking solace. They formed a bond, and he would playfully flirt with her when I wasn't around. Eventually, their friendship morphed into something more, an illicit and deeply disturbing harmony. The image of my wife and brother in each other's arms churned my stomach, a cacophony of revulsion. Karen, racked with guilt, ended things with David, which coincided with her abrupt decision to leave me for New Year's. Despite my pleas, she was adamant about leaving. When we returned to college after the holidays, she was back to her usual cheerful self, a master of deception. 2 weeks later, the pregnancy test confirmed our worst fears. The child's paternity was uncertain. Karen, ever the pragmatist, decided to stay with me, knowing I was the more reliable brother, the one who wouldn't abandon his family. So, we got married, a marriage built on lies and deceit. Now, my world is a shattered melody, the discordant notes of betrayal echoing in my ears. The son I love might not even be mine, a cruel twist of fate. Karen confessed to continued liaisons with David, their undeniable chemistry driving them back to each other's arms. They'd sneak off to hotels, lying about working late, their illicit rendezvous a counterpoint to our hollow marriage. I learned that half of her business trips were romantic getaways with my brother, a symphony of betrayal conducted behind my back. The question that haunts me is why? Why did she marry me if she loved my brother? Karen, ever the self-serving character, claims she didn't want to be the one to break off the marriage, seeking refuge in the illusion of our family. She saw me as a good father, a convenient substitute for the true father of our child. I told Karen I was glad she finally confessed, but that our melody had reached its end. As I packed my bags, she wept, begging for forgiveness, expecting a volcanic eruption of anger. Instead, I remained calm, the silence a deafening counterpoint to her pleas. She insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for us, arguing that mistakes happen in every marriage. But her words rang hollow, a discordant attempt to salvage our shattered harmony. I realized that our love story was a cruel farce, a symphony composed of lies and deceit. Leaving was the only resolution, the final note in the discordant symphony of our marriage. The future stretches before me, an uncertain melody waiting to be composed. But one thing is certain, I will never let anyone play me for a fool again. My heart, once shattered, will heal, and I will find a new melody, a true harmony, one that is built on trust, respect, and love. Karen tried to play our son would be affected by a divorce card, claiming that children shouldn't be raised in broken homes. Classic Karen, always pulling out the emotional torture when things don't go her way. I, however, was not moved by her tactics. I reminded her that there was a possibility that I was not even the father of our son, which made her burst into tears and accuse me of being cruel. It's as if she believed that I was bound to stay in the marriage, no matter what. Perhaps I had been too forgiving in the past, always letting things slide. But this time, it was different. While I did love her, something about this whole situation felt off. Was it because we had a son together? Or was it because we had been together since college? I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but one thing was for certain. Trust was now a major issue in our marriage. Karen, however, was adamant that it wasn't too late to fix things. But I struggled to believe her words. After all, actions speak louder than words, and her actions in the past had left me with no more patience or trust left in her. I couldn't help but feel like her attempts at reconciliation now were simply hollow, no matter how much I wanted to believe her. But even if I did forgive her, could I ever forget that she had slept with my own brother? I've always believed in forgiving mistakes, because we are all flawed. But this was beyond the acceptable limits of forgiveness. I couldn't just brush it off and pretend like everything was okay. So, I left her crying on the doorstep and checked into a hotel to clear my head. The next day, I went straight to my parents and revealed everything about Karen's affair with David. I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. I explained how they had been secretly sleeping together for years, and it was a bombshell that even my parents were not prepared for. The shock on their faces was undeniable. True to her nature, my mother initially tried to defend David, insisting that her golden child could never do such a thing to his own brother. But I was determined to expose the truth, no matter what it took. I asked my parents to remain silent and let me call David in front of them. I instructed them to stay quiet so I could catch David off guard, making him believe that it was a private conversation. When David answered the phone, I confronted him about the affair. At first, he vehemently denied it, refusing to accept any responsibility. But when I told him that Karen had admitted to everything, he started blaming her, calling her characterless. He claimed that it wasn't his fault if women were attracted to him, and that he was the better-looking brother. I couldn't believe his audacity. I told him firmly that I would expose him to everyone. But David just mocked me, saying that no one would believe me because he was the golden child. I scoffed at his arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth. Knowing that our parents had heard everything, David went quiet. He then spluttered, trying to explain himself and salvage his image. My mother, still in shock, demanded an explanation from David. He stuttered through a feeble attempt to justify his actions, blaming everyone else but himself and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. I could see that my mother, who had once been protective of her favored son, now felt a mix of disappointment and anger towards him. In that charged moment, I felt a strange sense of vindication. For years, I had endured David's torment. But now, the truth was out and the roles were reversed. It was David who stood exposed, his actions laid bare for everyone to see. As David's words faltered, my father, who was usually reserved in his expressions, couldn't contain his disappointment. He asked me to pass him the phone and began to speak to David. "David," my father began, his voice laden with disappointment, "what you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother, but a betrayal of this family. You slept with your brother's wife and continued the affair even after they were married. Your actions have severe consequences and have irreversibly shattered the trust we had in you. I raised both of you to value family loyalty and decency. What you've shown today defies everything I've tried to teach you." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into David's conscience. "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable. You've not only hurt him, but also torn apart the bonds that hold our family together. Your mother and I are partly to blame for what you've become, but we will no longer tolerate this behavior. From today, you're cut off from the college funds I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to pay your university fees on your own. I will also stop funding your lifestyle. Do you think it makes you more of a man to sleep with married women? Let's see how you manage without my money." Throughout this whole ordeal, I maintained a composed demeanor. Although I initially wanted to scream at David, watching my dad punish him was the ultimate vindication. I had exposed his true nature, and it was clear that he had underestimated the consequences. My mother, despite David's persistent protests, continued to justify him. But my father swiftly ended the call, shutting down David's attempts to explain away his actions. Afterward, my mother approached me and hugged me. It had been a long time since we shared such a moment, but in that embrace, I felt a sense of closure. For so long, I had been tormented by David's malicious actions. But now the tables had turned, and it was he who was left exposed. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The intricacies of family drama can be both troublesome and entertaining, and my personal experience is no exception. There was once a time when there was an unspoken understanding and support between my family members, but all that changed when my ex-wife Karen's affair was brought to light. It was a mess, let me tell you, but I never could have imagined that I would eventually be vindicated and embraced by my own mother. It was like something out of a movie, I swear. But hold your horses, dear reader, because there's more. As if the family drama wasn't enough, my dad stepped in and helped me find a top-notch lawyer to handle my divorce with Karen. And let me tell you, she and her lawyer tried to fight dirty. They even had the nerve to ask for alimony, claiming that I earned more than her. But of course, her affair played heavily in my favor and justice was served. We also conducted a paternity test, which confirmed that the child she was carrying was not mine, but it was the product of her affair with David, my own brother. Can you imagine the pain and fury I felt in that moment? It was even worse than discovering Karen's infidelity. My own blood, my own kin, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. It was a hard pill to swallow, I tell you. But alas, the storm had not passed yet. I had to stay strong, especially when Karen begged me to continue visiting my son. She argued that he shouldn't be punished for the situation, but I couldn't bear the thought of seeing him. He reminded me too much of David, and that alone filled me with disgust. Once the divorce was finalized, I finally felt a sense of freedom as I moved into my own bachelor pad. It was quite a surreal experience for me, since I had married at a young age and never truly experienced independence. But with my naturally independent nature, I adapted quickly and enjoyed my new lifestyle. It had been a few weeks since everything had settled down, or so I thought, and then my dad called me out of the blue, informing me that he was considering changing his will. Apparently, he didn't want to leave anything to David, and I can tell you that he was one stubborn man. Once he made a decision, he stuck to it. He told me how David had been trying to reach out to our parents, even showing up at their doorstep to beg for forgiveness. But our parents had finally reached their breaking point and refused to let him in. Yes, even my mother, who usually gave in to David's tantrums, was done with him. Though it must have been hard for her, since David was her son. But then again, whose fault was it that he slept with his brother's wife and got her pregnant? Definitely not mine. Now here comes the juicy part. My dad told me that he planned to leave everything to me, ensuring that David wouldn't contest it later. And when I say everything, I mean everything. His assets, retirement fund, and life insurance, all amounting to nearly $2 million. The only condition in his will was that if my dad passed away before my mom, she would continue living in their house, even though ownership would transfer to me. I didn't really mind this, as I wanted to take care of my mom in her final days. But then, somehow, David must have found out about this, and he couldn't resist calling me yesterday in a desperate attempt to make amends. He explained how he was struggling with college, and how Karen was pestering him for child support since she had discovered the paternity results. He claimed to have no money and was looking for part-time jobs, but couldn't find anything. He begged me to talk to our family in hopes of starting fresh, as he really needed my help. I couldn't help but laugh in his face at first, telling him that I was done with him and that he should have thought about the consequences before sleeping with my wife and getting her pregnant. But then, he argued that I was being unfair and that Karen was to blame too. And you know what? I kind of agreed. After all, I had divorced her, making her his sole responsibility now. So he shouldn't be calling me to complain about her or their child, as these were the consequences of his own actions. David then had the audacity to raise his voice, and that's when I shut him down. I reminded him that he was no longer the golden child of our family, but the villain who had slept with his own brother's wife. At that moment, he began to cry, telling me how everyone, including our grandparents and relatives, had turned against him. And while this was true, it was no longer my concern. I told him that we were done and that he should never call me again, as I no longer considered him my brother. I can't lie though, despite my hatred for him, hearing him cry did stir up some emotions in me. I guess I didn't realize how much I still cared for him, or at least the brother I once knew. But now I'm stuck in a predicament. Should I talk to our parents about David, or should I wash my hands clean of the situation? I mean, let's face it, he's a lost cause and I don't want to deal with his drama anymore. On the other hand, he is my brother, and I can't help but feel a tinge of guilt for leaving him to fend for himself. Any advice, dear reader, or shall I just let him suffer the consequences of his actions? Now, dear reader, I have to be honest with you. That was just the condensed version of my story. There were details and emotions that I simply couldn't convey in a single paragraph, but I'll try my best to add them in now. So buckle up and get ready for the ride. First and foremost, I have to address the fact that I have been called cruel and selfish for my decision to cut contact with Henry, the son I once believed was mine. But let me make one thing clear. This isn't some simple stepson situation. This is my brother's child, the fruit of his betrayal with my wife. And it was not a one-time thing. They carried on an affair for quite some time before I found out. Naturally, this revelation caused me a great deal of emotional turmoil, and it took me a while to come to terms with it. I cried for days, dear reader. Me, a grown man, crying over a lost marriage and the betrayal of my own flesh and blood. Can you imagine that? And that's not even the worst part. The main reason I refuse any contact with Henry is because I no longer want Karen in my life. If I remain connected to her child, she will find a way to worm her way back into my life, and I can't have that. I need my space, you see. Yes, I know this might seem cruel and selfish to some, but can you blame me? I was completely blindsided by her affair, and I won't risk letting her back into my life again. I've suffered enough because of her. Thank you very much. Now let's talk about my dear mother. Where do I even begin? It was her who informed David about my dad changing his will, leading David to call me in desperation. And when I confronted her in front of my dad, she broke down, saying that I had punished David enough and that he had learned his lesson. But you know what, dear reader? That's not even the worst part. My dad, bless his stubborn heart, firmly told my mother that if she believed what David did was forgivable, then he could no longer stay married to her. Because how could he forgive such a betrayal? And that, my dear readers, silenced my mother. My dad made it clear that if she ever talked with David again, and we found out, she could pack her bags and leave. Now let me tell you, my dad is a man of his word. And I honestly think my mother has finally learned from her mistakes. And the last update from me, dear reader, is that my relationship with my parents has improved greatly over the past few months. My dad and I go golfing every weekend, and he treats me more like a buddy than a son. As for my mother, well, she has stayed away from David and hasn't even brought him up in conversation. As for David, the last I heard was from my cousin, who said that he had been asking everyone for money and eventually had to drop out of college because he couldn't pay his bills.